Hello there ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to a mini battle report, if you will, on my first game of Warhammer Age of Sigmar. I played this over a hangout with Dreddy, my fellow chilling wargamer. If you want to look at her channel, there'll be a link in the description. She's got some views on Age of Sigmar as well. So because I was moving all the models around on the table, we didn't play with a particularly high model count. As you can see, it's dwarves against vampire counts. We didn't play on a full-size table because we're not using that many models, so it didn't seem necessary. The few terrain pieces down there, which we rolled for on the random table. The only notable ones were the house is sinister, which means that units near that will cause fear, which makes battle shock tests harder for the enemy. And the trees are damned, so units have the opportunity to sacrifice some of their troops in order to become more powerful, which those zombies will be doing at some point. So the two forces on the dwarf side, I have a dragon slayer, a cannon, 5 iron drakes, 10 hammerers and Belagar iron hammer. And on the vampire count side, Dreddy had a vampire, you can see in the top left, a Vargulf represented by that rather fetching Reaper bone horror, 10 skeletons, 20 zombies and a spirit host. The vampire counts did outnumber the dwarves by enough numbers to warrant a sudden death. So if I manage to kill the vampire, then I will just win the game automatically. We weren't going for any particular balance in the forces, we just picked what looked roughly balanced to the eye, because really this was more of an exercise of nailing the rules down and just getting a feel for the overall mechanics. I'm sure we got quite a few rules wrong, which is why I didn't want to do a full battle report, or a full video or a live stream or anything, because it would have been very slow and most of the rules would have been incorrect the first few turns, I imagine. So I just decided to take a few quick pictures on my phone as we were going, which explains why one or two of them might be a tad blurry, but I'm sure you can deal with that for this inside scoop and my in-depth analysis of the Age of Sigmar. So at the end of turn 1, everyone has pretty much advanced a little bit, even the dwarves, moving, as odd as that may seem. We decided to pretty much get stuck in there. The vampire count's got really terrible rolls for running, which is why they haven't come very far, and there's a bit of inconsistency between how far the skeletons and the zombies have moved. I think they rolled 1 and 2 inches each for their run. The dwarfs obviously are in no particular hurry because we've got some nice hardware at the back here, and in the next image you can see that 6 skeletons have been removed. That's a result of the dwarves getting turn 2 first and firing the cannon and the iron drakes into the skeletons, so 6 of them are dead. And we decided not to have any summons in this game, just to keep things simple, just to get a feel for the mechanics. Any unit that has a big blue Adepticon dice on it has some kind of effect, but I don't remember what they all were. As you can see here, the zombies have sacrificed a couple of their troops because they were near to those woods, and they were granted a bonus because of this. Now, one thing that's immediately different about this game is that the way someone's facing holds no bearing on where they're able to charge. For example, here, the Vargulf was staring down that Dragon Slayer on the other side, but decided with its movement to just come over into the middle and then charge the Iron Drakes. And there's nothing that can be done about that. Another thing before that as well, the Vargulf was considering flying over the top of my lines towards the cannon, but it couldn't find anywhere to land, since you're not allowed to come down and stop within 3 inches of an enemy unit. So that really makes it more difficult to get into the back of gun lines when you're trying to land. Before, even the tiniest little crevice you could probably fit in there. Not anymore. But anyway, it ploughed into the Iron Drakes, who are quite sturdy little fellows. And you can also see that the zombies were able to get into the hammerers, and they've all piled in there. So it actually looks like there's less of them than there actually are, because they're all mashed together now, to try and get as many of them into the fight as possible. And when they're on these square bases, if you do push them really close together, then you'll find that more of them can reach over the top of each other to fight. I'm really not a fan of the measure from the model thing, though. That's one thing I'm not keen on at this stage. I can understand it, and it makes sense because everyone's going to be using different sized bases for a while. But I've heard horror stories about people piling up their models on top of each other's bases and so on, which seems a little bit silly to me. So I would imagine that most of the time I would at least attempt to house rule it so that we just measure from the bases, unless something's got an obscenely sized base. In the various combats that have gone on here, some of the zombies have been killed. 1 hammer you'll notice is missing, 1 iron drake, and Belagar Ironhammer has ploughed into the side of the Vargulf, and he is a serious combat beast. In 8th edition he had the special rule where he could choose to just double his attacks for one turn, but in this game, after he's attacked, you can choose to then attack again once per game, which is actually an improvement, because then you'll know if you get lucky with your first 4 attacks and manage to kill something off, you don't need to use it then. Whereas in the old edition you would have to declare beforehand that you're using all 8. But he didn't quite finish off the Vargulf, so I thought, well, why not attack again? And he managed to take it out. The effects there that you can see on those units are the various effects bestowed by the generals. The vampire put something onto my dwarves, I think. Now, the zombies are still fairly plentiful, but the skeletons have all been killed off at this stage by the various shooting. So her spirit host actually does get into the combat, which is just off camera here. But that means all I have to do is finish off the vampire to win the game, which is now woefully exposed out on its own in the open. So everyone starts chasing it, all my individual models and the Iron Drakes running after it, but the cannon manages to finish it off. So there's one dead vampire. And there you can see the battlefield at the end, lots of corpses on the vampire count side, not many on the dwarf side. Again, we're not entirely sure how balanced this was, because we didn't want to use a necromancer and get summons in there, because that would have slowed the game down, and we were really just interested in working through the mechanics. And I have to say, there's a lot more tactical depth than first meets the eye. If you're just watching from the outside, it may seem like everything's just piling into the middle. But there are interesting things you can do. For example, the fleeing from combat, the positioning of units. Since you can't stop within 3 inches of a unit, it makes it much easier to stop them using shenanigans to weasel around your lines. That was a big part of 8th edition, when you had reforming fast cavalry, for example, weaseling through the tiniest of gaps, and then just ending up right in the juicy centre of your army. So really, it's just different. And the special rules do seem to retain a lot of the flavour of the old army books. I gave you the example of Belagar and being able to attack twice, and most of the units have some sense of the old flavour. For example, the cannon, if you have an engineer next to it, that'll improve it. I think next time we try a game like this, we'll probably have to give the vampire counts slightly more models, maybe give them a little more variety, maybe some Black Knights or Crypt Horrors, Mortis Engine or Corpse Cart, something like that. Another thing that's notable, zombies and really feeble infantry that were really just there as attacks to get the good stuff in 8th edition. Because really, if you didn't have to take the core troops, then you wouldn't take zombies. There'd be no point. But now they can actually be quite potent, because you can really stack up buffs on them. Especially with the terrain, if you position them well enough so that they're near a beneficial piece of terrain, you can get a couple of buffs on them. You can get them near a corpse cart, then they actually become really powerful in close combat. If you have a lot of them as well, they get a boost. In this game, it didn't really happen because I just luckily passed an awful lot of mass saves with the hammerers. But zombies are definitely not to be sniffed at, and not just because they smell bad anymore. They actually seem like they pack some punch now, which is interesting. The cannon, although in this game it did manage to kill off a model on its own, they're far more versatile now. You can quite happily shoot a cannon into some skeletons and not feel like you're wasting a cannonball, because the way the damage is dealt is different now. So you won't be solely targeting large monsters and chariots and so on, necessarily. Obviously we need to try out some more units, a slightly larger game perhaps, and also I'm looking forward to getting some in-person games in with anyone around this region. The few people I've spoken to that live around here so far, a lot of them being 40k players, are actually really interested in trying this game, so that's a good sign. So perhaps I'll be able to get some games in fairly soon. And I actually feel as though I'll be able to get those people that weren't previously interested in fantasy into the game, just because this is so much quicker and easier to pick up. Once you've read those 4 pages of rules, you can play the game. Obviously you've got the war scrolls in front of you, so you know what each of your units can do. If you start off small and don't have too much information to take in on that front, then I think it's going to be incredibly accessible to more people than ever before, really, which is a good thing. Currently I'm just weighing up whether to actually buy the Age of Sigmar starter box. I don't think I can justify it in my budget if I have to buy the entire thing, but if I find someone who wants to team up and take the chaos half of it, then that's certainly going to be doable. So you'll definitely hear all about that if I do go ahead with that purchase. So all in all, I think there's a lot more to this game than meets the eye. The 4 pages of rules aren't really enough to judge it from. It's the individual rules and the synergies on the various war scrolls that are really going to make this game. I mean, if you think about a game like War Machine, the basic mechanics are actually very, very simple. It's only the individual rules for all the different models that make it as complicated as it is. I'm not saying this is anything like as tactical as War Machine. I'm just saying you can't judge a game solely from the basic rules. So I hope you enjoyed this little glimpse into my first game of Warhammer Age of Sigmar, and hopefully there will be more to come in the near future. These are exciting times for us tabletop fantasy enthusiasts,